let's move on to this story now. So while South Africa enjoys a relatively positive media freedoms compared to its counterparts on the continent, analysts believe more can be done to strengthen press freedom. Dr Prinola Govenden from the University of Johannesburg's Department of Media and Communications joins us now for this conversation. Dr. Govenden, good morning to you. Thank you so much for speaking to us. I want to start with this, where you place media freedom in South Africa.
Thank you, Naledi. It's absolutely great to see you again and be here with you on the Saturday morning. And good morning, viewers. So I recently penned a Conversation Africa article where I actually said that if you have to holistically look at media freedom in the last 30 years, it's very healthy. Reporters Without Borders last year in 2023 ranked us 25 out of 180 nations, stating, for example, in the last full year in 2023, we've had no journalists that have been jailed or detained or really draconian measures against journalism. We have in Section 16 of our Constitution, we have freedom of expression enshrined, which includes media freedom. So we are quite healthy. However, we have had isolated incidences, mostly involving government, with government proposals that have been a threat to media freedom. For example, in 2010, government put forward a media appeals tribunal, which would mean the statutory regulation of our press, the protection of state information bill, which was called the secrecy bill. It would mean the reclassification and declassification of important government information. And as you know, being a journalist, this is important for you to report in the public interest. But these are really isolated interests, and these laws were not enacted in Parliament and accepted.
And then, of course, what you've also talked about is, as part of the threats that we're seeing, is the State Security Agency monitoring journalists and tapping their phones. Is that big of a problem in South Africa?
No, actually, no, Lydia. I mean, the first time it was really mentioned was by SANEF, the South African National Editors Forum, during COVID-19. They noticed that state security is trying to tap journalists. Also, last year, News 24 did say that there is also some state surveillance of investigative journalism. So whilst it's worrying, it's not to the extent of other nations globally, but I also think that in my article I mentioned, you might have seen it, that with the advent of digital media and Google, it's posed new challenges to freedom of expression. The CEO of Media 24 in the Competition Commission's having a few hearings at the moment and a market inquiry said that Google is actually the biggest threat to freedom of expression and not government, because it's very hard to monitor. We have new kinds of technologies, but it's not something that we are seeing government really act on. It's just suspicions at this stage, but I don't think it's anything really to worry about.
Well, let's talk about that, right? The move towards digital and really what we call 4IR and how it's impacting how we tell stories in South Africa. What is it that South Africa needs to be doing from a policy point of view to protect us? I mean, we've had a massive discussion around how we need to legislate what tech is doing, but that's increasingly difficult.
Absolutely. And also, I mean, in South Africa, unlike the rest of the world in Africa, I mean, the internet, we have, for example, I mean, in UJ, we just celebrated UNESCO's World Radio Day. And despite the advent of digitalization and the innovation that 4IR, that mobile has brought, I mean, in Africa, most of the people are connecting via mobile phones. There still is the digital divide. So about 60% of the population is online in South Africa. However, I actually have some of my research looking at how we decolonize the media and regulate 4IR. And 4IR is being used by journalists, by our students, but it's still fairly new. So our policies really it's something government needs to consider now, because it's moving very fast. It's being used in Newsroom, but there aren't policies. And also with AI and algorithms, there's still a lot of inequalities here. So although 4IR and digital media has diversified the space, there's more voices, but there still is offline inequalities that are at play.
You know, yesterday here on Newzroom Afrika, we also spoke to Karen Moore, who is a legal journalist who is, of course, facing that private prosecution, or that attempt of a private prosecution by the former President Jacob Zuma. What do you make of that situation, and certainly how she's handled it, and the message that also sends to not just the country, but to the media landscape?
Yes, actually, now, Lydia, I watched that video on Newsroom on your Twitter page. And you know what? I mentioned it in my article because that was a landmark case. It was the first criminal prosecution case in the history of our nation involving freedom of expression. And there it was alleged that she had leaked medical records, but actually she argued, but it was a part of the documents submitted for the corruption trial. But what's important here is that she was actually of the view that it was crafted to intimidate her role as a journalist, but the High Court actually found that, and she says this as well, that legally there was no basis for this at all. She did not act illegally, and it is worrying. But again, we're very lucky in South Africa. We have a good court system.
Yeah.
We have freedom of expression, a good civil society, a lively group in South Africa sector. So that was struck off the roll. But I mean, just looking at her, you can absolutely see the toll it's taken on her.
Yeah.
We have, I mean, that's one of the things I mentioned in my article, that the power of investigative journalism in the last 30 years really, and her included, has to be commended. I mean, we have Sunday Times and City Press exposed through Gupta Leaks, the website, about a paper trail of about 200 emails that actually give a solidified paper trail of state capture and how the Guptas basically captured and were inflicted power on cabinet ministers, on state capture institutions. We have the VBS mutual bank that was also exposed by City Press. Also, we have a rising civic journalism. So we know about Ground Up. Everybody believed that it was Thabo Bester that was burnt in the prison, and it was Ground Up's investigative journalism that exposed that. They exposed corruption in our national lottery. And I think about our blue overall workers and people earning minimum wage. They are lined up to buy lottery tickets. This is their hard-earned money. And then there was corruption. So I think Karen Moore, this really should be celebrated. And I think we have a very libertarian democracy, and there's nothing really to worry about freedom of expression. But social media, and you mentioned that, there is a trend, and Karen Moore mentioned that social media has also brought about a new kind of bullying. I mean, her being a woman, she was threatened to be raped. There was ridiculing memes of her. So social media and 4IR, as you mentioned, has brought about challenge. And although we are constitutionally protected with freedom of expression, there's other kind of subversive means that, I mean, another woman, up-and-coming journalist or a student might think, do I really want to take Jacob Zuma head on? Because look at her bullying. So social media and 4IR is really going to change the space. Google has changed the space. So it's something that our policy and our Department of Communication and Information Systems in government has to look at and adapt.
And the thing is, as we go closer towards the elections, and we are really just a few weeks towards the elections, there's a fear that that sort of, tension in what you see and how journalists are spoken about on social media may very well intensify, right?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, one of my honor students actually is looking at cancel culture. I mean, cancel culture has happened for celebrities, for Miss South Africa contestants, but it can also really happen for political parties. So this is something that it's not regulated at the moment. We do have, I mean, the Film and Publications Board that look at content, pornography, children, but we don't really have something regulating social media. There is freedom of expression is actually allowed all the time, except when it's hate speech. But that's now also very difficult to prove. So it's something that our policies need to look at.
Yeah. It's interesting because earlier you were talking about the young journalists, some of your students perhaps that are watching, how journalists are being targeted sometimes on social media, and that might frighten them. But you've also in your paper talked about the juniorization of the newsroom. So a lot of the time we say, well, allow young people to come into the news space, but that's also, I suppose it speaks to the quality then of the news we're able to put out. What's the issue with the juniorization? Explain it for the average South African.
Absolutely. Thank you, Naledi. Such an important point. So in my paper, I talk about Mandela's vision for South Africa and how he speaks about it in 1992 at a press conference in Prague. He says that one of the biggest threats to freedom of expression at that time was a lack of transformation of the media. And then there was a whole lot of changes. We switched in 1994 from an economic system of racial capitalism to neoliberalism, which meant that our media is located in the market. So what has happened is then, as you know, the bottom line has become paramount. So from 1994, if you have to trace this, there's been lower budgets on investigative journalism. There's been a juniorization of newsrooms, because obviously then it's cheaper to hire graduates, and it's important to have vibrant, energetic journalists. If I have to look at some of my students, however, you still do need the, I mean, you need a Karen Moore with all her expertise and experience to be in the newsroom, but it's resulted in inexperience at reporting,
Yeah.
which is a direct knock-on effect of the commercialization of the media, and our media now being located in the market like other corporates, but the media's got a very specific public interest role. So that's the impact it's had on our newsrooms. The bottom line has become paramount. And I also found in a lot of my research empirically, looking at the power of neoliberalism, it's had an effect. For example, I looked at 6 English language newspapers, and you can see news topics, economics news has got a very elitist driven nature, the sameness of content.
Yeah.
So everybody's following that pack journalism trend. It's making money, what's cheaper. Now there's less money for investigative journalism, and then quality becomes sacrificed. So you do need a balance of yes, young and experienced and inexperienced, but you need maturer journalists, which will cost more money to hire and pay salaries.
Yeah, I'm reading now from the paper. You write, transformation of the media to represent diversity of people and their perspectives has not been achieved. I think you've just touched on it, but if you could expand on that a lot more. I mean, one of the things that I could argue is, well, we have so many radio stations that speak to the various languages of our nation, that we reach South Africans where they are. Where's the transformation still missing?
Yes, Naleli, absolutely wonderful point. So I think particularly SABC radio and community stations are very representative of our cultures. We have them in our little townships and our community radio stations. But just for the viewers, media transformation for us means, and this is what Nelson Mandela alluded to in 1992. He said, the reason why a lack of transformation is the biggest threat to media freedom in the country is because at that time, senior editorial staff and ownership and owners are cast from the same racial mold, which is the white middle-class males. And he said in principles, there's no problem in having that positionality and representation in our media editorial and ownership. However, they're far removed from the Black majority, which in 1994, 80% was Black in terms of racial demographic. So if you have to look at this definition that we need to have transformation means a representation of the perspectives and intersectionalities of South African society, that hasn't happened, because Mail and Guardian in 2019 looked at research and looking at boards and owners, and they found it's still white, privileged access. A lot of my research has found when Blackness is represented, be it Black labor, Black people protesting labor service delivery, Black leadership, it's represented in very negative ways.
Yeah.
And Sarah Haffajee, veteran journalist, has argued if you look at the transformation of South African society as a whole, it's the cappuccino effect, meaning that it is brown people at the bottom, lots of representation of Black people, women editors, but when it comes to the power hierarchy, it's white at the top with the little brown sprinkles, and that is not representative of our South African population.
Yeah, I'm very proud, and I know this sounds biased, but I'm very proud of the representation then of where Newzroom Afrika sits. And just lastly, I mean, let's talk a little bit about whether or not there are green shoots, right, that we're transforming the media, that, you know, that we do have a lot to be proud of as we look at press freedom in South Africa, the things that we should be most proud of as we wrap up the discussion.
I think we should be really proud of, I mean, we're a very vibrant and we have Freedom House described us as having a very vibrant and adversarial landscape. Yeah. We hold government in power. We have a lot of diversity, and we've got platform for vigorous debate. Like you've invited me here to speak about transformation, freedom of expression. That is to be celebrated. We've got increasing Black readership, owners and readers. But going into the next 30 years, we really need to address the power shift so that our media landscape is representative of all our people that deserve a stake in our media.
Squeeze one more in, if you'll allow me, Prinola. You know, as we get closer to elections, I think civic education is so important. I mean, where do you place how South African media is doing in really informing South Africans of the important role that they need to play? This particular election is going to be quite a difficult one, not just because it is so highly contested, but the technicalities, you know, the ballot papers. Are we doing enough to explain that to South Africans?
Yeah, Naledi, it's very interesting, of William Bird and his team at Media Monitoring Africa. They've empirically monitored every single election since '94, and I worked for them, actually. It was my first job. And they find that our media report, very fair and balanced, we give equal platform, etc. But really where the media is missing is this kind of structural, they do not give the structural element of issues in South Africa, of social justice issues, of inequality. You'll find there's a lot of events-based reporting, and that's a knock-on effect of neoliberalism. So you will know when IFP is launching their manifesto at Moses Mabhida, you'll know Cyril Ramaphosa is electioneering in the Alex township.
Yeah.
And then you'll know there'll be a press release that IFP want to steal ANC votes. So what's happening is we're giving our media is giving a platform to the political party spats, events-based reporting, but they really need, and they do well. I mean, Newzroom Afrika is also a more of an up-and-coming channel, SABC News. They're giving a good platform to elections and important issues, but I would really like to see more deeper issues of structural inequality and gender-based violence, and deeper issues where they're not following a packed journalism trend, and they're not only reporting on press releases and press conferences, but all in all, they're doing well.
Yeah. Well,